So I want you to imagine, just for a second, two siblings fighting over their late mother's house.
Okay, yeah. A pretty common scenario, unfortunately.
Right. It's in Johannesburg, and it is just this bitter, deeply emotional family dispute playing out right in the middle of a living room.
Oh, man.
Voices are raised, accusations are flying everywhere, and the tension is literally spilling out into the street. Neighbors are
It
watching.
affects the whole block.
Exactly. But what if I told you that this single, isolated neighborhood drama is actually quietly draining the entire city's treasury?
That is the part that is just so wild to think about.
It is, and today's deep dive explores exactly that. We're looking at how unresolved local conflicts, just like that one, fundamentally break local government.
And how one specific organization is pitching this really radical redesign of how a city even functions.
Yeah, so our source today is this fascinating presentation given to the city of Johannesburg.
Right.
It was delivered by Percy Matsamela, who is the secretary of the Gauteng Housing Forum. And it is, it's a brief document, but it is incredibly dense.
Very strategic.
It's a highly strategic pitch arguing that the traditional model of civic administration, the way we usually think a city should work, is essentially operating completely blind.
It really is a remarkable piece of civic architecture
Yeah.
to dissect because, like you said, the presentation is short, but the underlying mechanisms he's targeting, they are universally applicable.
To like any major city, right?
Oh, absolutely. Any massive urban center struggling with rapid growth. I mean, Matsamela isn't just standing up and complaining about a problem.
No, he's not just pointing fingers.
Right. He is actually deconstructing the basic assumptions of who is responsible for solving a crisis in the first place.
Yeah.
He's arguing that centralized government structures, just by their very nature, are totally unequipped to handle the granular, rapid speed of human conflict.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand the sheer scale of what the Gauteng Housing Forum is proposing here, we have to look at the philosophical foundation they lay down, like right at the beginning of their pitch to these city officials.
It sets the whole tone.
It does. Matsamela starts off by acknowledging that the city carries an enormous responsibility. He uses those exact words.
Yeah, he specifically names their mandate, which is smart.
Right. He lists providing sustainable human settlements, improving service delivery, and protecting the rights of residents. So he isn't walking into this government building and telling them they are obsolete or doing a terrible job.
No. He is actively validating their legal and structural mandate. And that validation is just a critical rhetorical starting point.
And showing respect.
Exactly. He establishes respect for the sheer weight of municipal administration. Because let's be real, providing a sustainable human settlement is a massive, massive logistical undertaking.
Oh, I can't even imagine. It requires what? Zoning laws, infrastructure development, utility management.
A vast legal framework. It's huge. So by validating that enormous responsibility up front, he creates this baseline of shared reality with a panel of officials.
He gets them nodding along.
Right. But then, immediately after establishing that baseline, he makes this crucial pivot,
The turn.
the turn. He states, flatly, that government cannot solve every housing challenge alone.
Which, on the surface, that sounds like a fairly standard collaborative talking point, like, oh, we all need to work together. But when you actually look at the mechanics of how a city operates, it's actually a pretty radical admission, isn't it?
Oh, it completely challenges the historical illusion of the omnipotent government.
The idea that the city can do everything.
Exactly. For a very long time, especially in these rapidly expanding metropolises, the assumption has always been that the city is the sole provider and the sole arbiter of solutions.
Right, like if something goes wrong, you call the city.
Right. If there is a problem anywhere within the city's geographical borders, the expectation is that the city's centralized machinery will process that problem and then deploy a solution.
They sit at the center.
Yeah, the government sits at the center of this hub-and-spoke model, receiving complaints from the edges and dispatching enforcement or aid back out.
But Matsamela is arguing that lasting solutions require partnerships with organizations that are physically present within those communities.
Yeah,
He emphasizes that these organizations understand the realities on the ground.
which introduces this concept we can call the proximity deficit of centralized government.
The proximity deficit, I like that. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, think about it. A municipality has the macro resources, right?
Yeah, they have tax revenue.
They have the tax revenue, the legal authority, the heavy machinery. But operationally, A centralized bureaucracy is physically and socially distant from the nuanced street-level realities of the neighborhoods it actually governs.
They're in an office building downtown somewhere.
Exactly. A city council sitting on the 10th floor of a municipal building simply cannot process information fast enough or with enough localized context to manage human-level crises as they ignite.
It makes me think of, it's like a head chef at a massive, busy restaurant, right?
Yeah.
The traditional government approach is like a head chef who insists on not only cooking every single meal, but also trying to wait every single table and wash every dish.
Which is impossible.
Right. And meanwhile, the community organizations are like the wait staff. They are standing right next to the hungry customers. They know who needs water. They know who has a food allergy.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Or, another way to look at it is like trying to navigate rush hour traffic in a massive city using a paper map drawn in 1995.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The government has the map. They know where the roads are legally supposed to be. They know the speed limits. They built the infrastructure.
Sure, they paved the roads.
But the community forums, they are the real-time GPS on your phone. They are the ones actually seeing the accident happen in real time. They see which lanes are blocked right now, and they know which side streets are currently flooded.
So if the city relies only on their paper map, they are going to send resources straight into a massive traffic jam.
Exactly. And taking that analogy even further, if the city refuses to integrate that real-time GPS data, the entire logistical network suffers.
Because they're just operating blind.
Yeah, the government is operating on delayed, abstract data, while the community is living the immediate physical reality. Matsimello is basically pointing out that this structural friction, this huge gap between the legal map and the street-level reality is what's tearing the civic ecosystem apart.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure, go for it.
Because I'm sure someone listening is thinking this. Wait, doesn't the city have the legal mandate and the tax revenue to do this? Like, I pay taxes.
Right.
So why shouldn't the government just expand its own departments to handle these localized housing disputes? Why should citizens and community forums have to step in and basically do the government's job?
It's a fair question, but the reality is that money cannot buy local trust.
Mm-hmm.
You could double the city's budget tomorrow. Seriously, you could hire 1,000 brand new municipal bureaucrats, give them all clipboards, put them in city vehicles, and send them into these neighborhoods.
Right.
But when they knock on a door during a superheated dispute over, say, an illegal occupation, they are still fundamentally viewed as outsiders.
Oh, I see. They're the authorities.
Exactly. They are representatives of a distant authority. The members of the Gauteng Housing Forum, however, are neighbors.
They live there.
They live there.
Okay.
So yes, you are paying taxes for the city to maintain its legal authority and its physical infrastructure, but the community itself holds the social currency that's required to actually de-escalate human conflict.
So it's essentially an issue of jurisdiction versus influence.
That's a perfect way to put it.
The city has the legal jurisdiction, clearly, but they completely lack the social influence to stop a problem before it reaches a boiling point.
Precisely that dynamic. And we really have to look closely at the specific phrasing Matsimello uses when he talks about the city's mandate. He says their job is protecting the rights of residents.
Right, protecting their rights.
But think about how legal and bureaucratic mechanisms work. They are designed for due process.
Which means lots of paperwork.
Lots of paperwork. They require documentation, filing periods, formal hearings. But human realities on the ground move infinitely faster than due process.
Yeah, an argument doesn't wait for a filing period.
Exactly. If a family is literally being torn apart today, or an illegal occupation is draining a neighborhood's water supply this week, telling those residents to go online, file a formal complaint, and wait 6 months for a hearing.
That's not protection.
No, it's a failure of protection. The damage happens in the waiting period.
Right, the damage happens in the waiting period. Which brings us perfectly to the core of the presentation, because Matsimello doesn't just get up there and speak in these abstract political theories about, housing problems.
No, he gets very specific.
He diagnoses the actual chaotic realities that the city's centralized map is completely missing. He actually lists 4 very distinct challenges that are driving this crisis across Johannesburg.
And what's fascinating here is the anatomy of the disputes he chooses to highlight.
Yeah.
Because he isn't talking about potholes. He's not talking about zoning permits for a new deck. He isolates 4 highly volatile human conflicts.
Okay, let's list them.
First, families fighting over inherited properties. Second, illegal occupations placing pressure on communities. Third, subsidized houses being sold unlawfully. And fourth, residents simply not understanding housing legislation.
I want to really dig into these because they sound so intense. Let's start with that first one. Families fighting over inherited properties.
Right.
When you and I hear the phrase housing crisis, I think the default image for most people is usually just a lack of supply.
Like not enough apartment buildings being built.
Right. Not enough bricks, not enough cement, a lack of available land to build on. But a family fighting over a deceased parent's home, that isn't a supply issue at all.
No, the house already exists.
Exactly. It's this deeply emotional, relational breakdown that leaves a piece of existing infrastructure in absolute legal limbo.
We really need to explore the sociological weight of this specific scenario because it just perfectly illustrates that proximity deficit we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, walk me through it.
Okay, consider the actual mechanics of an inherited property dispute in a developing urban context like Johannesburg. A homeowner passes away. They leave behind a house, maybe it's a subsidized property, but they don't leave a clear, legally binding will.
Or maybe they do, but the family has no idea how to execute it through the formal municipal channels.
Right, either way, you instantly have a vacuum of ownership.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
Always. So, two siblings both firmly believe they have the rightful claim to this house.
Yeah.
Maybe one sibling actually lived there and cared for the ailing parent for the last 5 years, while the other sibling is the eldest and claims, traditional inheritance rights.
I can see how messy that gets immediately.
The conflict begins right there in the living room. It is fueled by intense grief, massive financial anxiety, and probably decades of complex family dynamics.
Oh, for sure. And neither of those siblings is going to just calmly walk down to the city council offices to file formal property transfer paperwork because they're currently locked in a bitter war over who actually gets to put their name on that exact paperwork.
Which means the city is completely, utterly blind to the fact that this property is now a contested zone.
Right, because nobody hit the alarm button at City Hall.
Exactly. To the centralized government looking at their database on a computer screen, the house still belongs to the deceased parent. It's a perfectly normal plot of land.
Everything looks fine on the map.
But on the ground, the neighborhood is watching a family completely tear itself apart. The tension bleeds out into the street. Neighbors start taking sides.
Oh man, the drama.
And practically speaking, the physical maintenance of the property likely just stops because neither sibling wants to invest their own money into a house they might lose in a month.
That makes total sense. So the grass grows high, the roof leaks.
Yeah, the property begins to physically degrade,
Yeah.
which then impacts the property value and the actual safety of the entire street.
All while the city thinks everything is perfectly fine because nobody has filed a formal grievance in triplicate?
That is the truly insidious nature of this kind of crisis. It rots from the inside out. Now, let's look at his second point. Illegal occupations placing pressure on communities.
Right. Illegal occupations.
This is another scenario where that centralized map completely fails the real-time GPS reality.
Because an illegal occupation isn't just a victimless, administrative violation on a piece of paper. It actively destabilizes the entire ecosystem of that specific street.
Absolutely. Think about the physical mechanics of it. When individuals illegally occupy a building or a vacant piece of land, they obviously aren't integrated into the city's planned infrastructure grid.
Right. They don't have utility accounts.
No, so what do? They have to survive. So they are tapping into local water lines, they're increasing the load on localized sanitation systems, and they're drawing undocumented illegal power straight from the grid.
Oh, wow. So it's a physical strain on the neighborhood?
A massive one. This places immense physical pressure on the exact same resources that the legally recognized residents are relying on every day.
Which instantly breeds resentment, right?
Oh, immediately.
I mean, the existing community wakes up, they see their water pressure drop to nothing, their streets suddenly become crowded, and they feel a total loss of security because these new occupants exist completely outside the formal social contract of that neighborhood.
Exactly. And what is the traditional centralized government response to an illegal occupation?
Call the police.
Eventually, maybe. But first, it requires a lengthy legal process. The city has to find out about it. Then they must serve formal eviction notices. They have to navigate really complex human rights considerations regarding housing, schedule court dates, wait for the docket to clear, and then eventually mobilize law enforcement.
That sounds like it would take forever.
It can take months. Very often it takes years.
Years. And during that entire time, the local community is just absorbing all of that physical and social pressure.
Yes.
So that initial resentment just ferments into outright hostile anger. The government is busy following due process, checking boxes, but the community is literally suffocating under the immediate daily reality of the occupation.
Which brings us right to the third challenge Mazzamella highlights: subsidized houses being sold unlawfully.
Unlawfully sold subsidized housing. Okay, explain this one because it sounds a bit complicated.
It's a really fascinating, tragic intersection of intense economic desperation and rigid legal constraint. So the government provides subsidized housing to vulnerable populations, right? The goal is to ensure a baseline of sustainable human settlement.
Right, to give people a safety net.
Exactly. But legally, because it's a state subsidy, there are very strict covenants attached to these properties. You cannot simply turn around, put a for sale sign in the yard, and sell a subsidized house on the open market for a quick cash profit.
Well, yeah, that defeats the entire purpose of the program. It's meant to house people, not act as a stock they can trade.
Exactly. It's not supposed to provide liquid capital. But again, human reality intervenes on the ground.
Right.
Say a family living in one of these subsidized houses suddenly faces a catastrophic medical emergency. Or maybe the main breadwinner loses their job and they have absolutely zero income.
And they don't have savings.
Right. That house, that physical structure, is suddenly the only real asset they have access to. So the immediate economic desperation just completely overrides their adherence to some municipal covenant they signed 5 years ago.
So what do? They just sell it under the table.
Yes. They sell the house unlawfully, almost always in completely informal cash transactions, to a third party. They take that cash to solve their immediate crisis, paying the hospital bill or buying food.
Oh, man. But now the whole legal system is broken.
Completely broken. The chain of title is shattered. The person physically living in the house is no longer the person the city's database thinks is living in the house.
And I imagine the new owner has absolutely no legal standing whatsoever.
None. Which means they can't legally apply for municipal services in their own name, they can't get proper property insurance, and they themselves become incredibly vulnerable to exploitation because they don't legally own the roof over their head.
So it creates this entire shadow market that the city can't even see, let alone regulate or protect.
Exactly. It's a shadow city operating underneath the legal city. And all three of these massive issues we just talked about, the inherited property disputes, the illegal occupations, and these unlawful sales, they're all compounded by Mazzamella's fourth point.
Right, which was about understanding the law. Yeah.
Yes. He points out that many residents simply do not understand housing legislation or the correct legal processes.
This feels like the tragic undercurrent of the whole presentation, honestly.
It really is.
He is pointing out that a massive portion of all this chaos isn't born out of malicious criminality, It's not people trying to be evil. It's born of a profound disconnect between the language of the state and the language of the citizen.
Yes, the language barrier is huge.
I mean, housing legislation is incredibly dense. It is written in pure legalese. It involves zoning codes, complex bylaws, administrative procedures with bizarre acronyms. If you are just a layperson dealing with a sudden, terrifying housing crisis, trying to decipher municipal law is like trying to read a foreign language while your house is literally on fire.
That is a perfect way to describe it. And Mazzamella maps out the tragic trajectory of these human breakdowns. He argues that this fundamental lack of understanding leads directly to a dispute.
Because people don't know what else to do.
Right. And then the dispute escalates because there is no immediate localized intervention to de-escalate it. And because it escalates, the parties eventually finally turn to the formal adversarial court system.
And as he notes in the pitch, by the time these matters actually reach the government's desk, 3 terrible things have already happened.
Right, he lists them out.
Relationships have already completely broken down, legal costs have increased astronomically, and communities have lost all confidence in the system.
And we really have to pause on that final point. The psychological toll of that losing confidence in the system, it just cannot be overstated.
Because it creates a cycle.
A terrible cycle. Imagine if a neighborhood watches 2 brothers spend 3 entire years fighting bitterly over an inherited house. They drain whatever small savings they have on lawyers' fees, while the physical property just rots and the street becomes this tense battleground.
Yeah.
The community watching that internalizes a very, very dark lesson. They learn that the government is totally incapable of helping them when they actually need it.
Right. Because even if a judge, eventually bangs a gavel 3 years later and issues a formal ruling that definitively awards the house to one brother, the city might look at that and say, great, a resolved case. We updated the database.
The paperwork is filed.
Right. The paperwork is done. But the human collateral damage is catastrophic. The family is shattered. Those brothers are never going to speak to each other again.
The neighbors are alienated from each other.
Exactly. The legal system resolved the property deed, but it utterly failed to resolve the actual human crisis.
You know the old saying, the operation was a success, but the patient died.
Yes, that's exactly what this is.
This is the grim reality of reactive governance. By the time the centralized map registers a problem and deploys a solution, the community's social infrastructure has already sustained permanent, irreversible damage.
Okay, so if the legal system is actively making these community disputes worse by dragging them out and forcing people into these adversarial battles, what is the alternative?
Oh, that's the big question.
Because a city can't just ignore property law, right? They can't just throw their hands up and say, you know what, let the neighborhoods sort out complex real estate disputes based on whoever shouts the loudest.
No, you'd have anarchy.
Right. Yeah. There has to be some mechanism to enforce the law without destroying the community in the process.
And this is exactly where the presentation pivots. We move from diagnosing the disease to prescribing the actual cure.
The three-pillar model.
Yes. The Gauteng Housing Forum proposes what they term a practical three-pillar model. And this model is designed to completely shift the entire municipal housing system from a reactive posture, waiting for the explosion, to a proactive posture that diffuses the tension before it ever reaches a courtroom door.
And the structure of this three-pillar antidote is really fascinating to me because it doesn't try to replace the government's legal authority. It acts more like a buffer zone in front of it.
Yes, a perfect description.
Let's look at Pillar 1, community mediation. Matsmela states, and I quote, "We resolve disputes before they become court matters."
We must critically examine why courts are often the absolute worst possible venue for neighborhood or family housing disputes.
Oh, they're terrible for this kind of thing.
They are. The legal system is inherently adversarial. It is explicitly designed to determine a winner and a loser based on the very strict interpretation of written statutes.
It's a battlefield. You walk in, you arm yourself with a lawyer, well, you can even afford one, and you basically try to legally destroy the other party's claim.
And in family disputes, especially over an inherited subsidized house, binary outcomes where one sibling takes absolutely everything and the other is literally evicted, those are rarely sustainable for the wider family structure.
No, it just guarantees lifelong hatred.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the barrier to entry for the court system is just massive. It requires immense resources. You have to take time off work just to attend hearings. You need money for legal representation. And there's a huge cognitive load in navigating complex procedures.
It's exhausting.
It is. So for vulnerable populations, these barriers often mean they either abandon their rights entirely or, tragically, they engage in extrajudicial, sometimes violent conflict resolution on their own.
So Pillar 1, community mediation, intercepts that exact conflict. It changes the venue from a sterile, high-stakes courtroom to a localized, context-rich environment.
The mechanics of this are so vital. In community mediation, the mediators are members of the forum, which means they are peers. They understand the cultural context, they probably know the history of the family, and they understand the unwritten social dynamics of that specific street.
They speak the language.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when they sit down in that living room with the warring siblings, the goal isn't to issue a legally binding verdict that crushes one party. The goal is consensus.
Just getting everyone to breathe.
Exactly. The goal is to find a livable compromise that preserves the family relationship and stabilizes the physical property.
They bring the problem back down to the people who actually know the neighborhood instead of sending it all the way up to a judge who was just staring at a cold case file. They de-escalate the emotion so that logic can actually enter the room.
And once that immediate emotional fire is put out, the system has to ensure it doesn't just reignite a week later.
Right. Which brings us to Pillar 2, housing compliance. The presentation explains this as helping residents understand their rights and responsibilities through education and community engagement.
And this, to me, feels like the most empathetic part of the entire proposal.
Oh, completely.
It explicitly acknowledges that a lot of the chaos we discussed earlier, like the unlawful selling of those subsidized houses isn't driven by a malicious desire to break the law. It's driven by a lack of understanding.
Yeah, it treats education as a tool of empowerment rather than just like a prerequisite for punishment.
Exactly. Often a municipality approaches compliance purely as a policing exercise.
Right, they send out
They
inspectors.
send inspectors, they issue heavy fines, they take notices to doors. It's totally punitive. But Matsamila is proposing preventative compliance. The forum goes into the community and hosts workshops.
Like they actually talk to people.
They sit down with residents and explain why a subsidized house cannot be sold on the informal market. They explain the legal protections that are completely lost when a property transfer isn't registered properly.
They are translating the dense municipal legalese into practical, everyday language.
Mhm.
If you help a resident truly understand why a process exists, you aren't just giving them a list of rules they have to memorize. You're equipping them to navigate the system safely. You're giving them actual agency.
And that agency significantly reduces the friction in the overall system. If residents know how to properly report a deceased estate,
Right.
and they know why it's important, to do it.
Right.
The city gets accurate data without having to send an inspector out to investigate a dilapidated house 3 years too late.
Okay, but let's be real for a second. Pillars 1 and 2, mediation and education, they sound a lot like traditional community volunteer work.
They're
right?
sure they have that flavor.
They are very noble, and I'm sure they are highly effective on a micro level, but they are still essentially isolated interventions. If the proposal just stopped there, the Gauteng Housing Forum would really just be a very helpful neighborhood watch.
Right.
But Pillar 3 is what elevates this from a nice community project to an absolute masterclass in civic administration.
Well-
Pillar 3 is governance.
This is the structural linchpin of the entire proposal. Matsamila defines Pillar 3 as creating structured collaboration between communities and the city through reporting, accountability, and stakeholder participation.
Okay, I have another analogy for this one. It sounds exactly like a localized healthcare triage system.
Ooh, I like that. Let's hear it.
So think about how a massive hospital operates. Pillar 1, the community mediation, is the emergency room. A patient comes in with a severe bleeding wound, which is our active family conflict over a house.
Right.
The ER doctors, the community mediators, they need to stop the bleeding right now, locally, before the patient bleeds out and the conflict destroys the family. So they mediate just to stabilize the immediate crisis.
Okay, and taking your hospital analogy a step further, Pillar 2, housing compliance, that functions as the physical therapy and discharge education.
Yes.
Once the patient is stabilized in the ER, you don't just push them out the front door and say good luck. You educate them on how to care for the wound at home, how to change their diet, and how to avoid the behaviors that caused the injury in the first place.
Right, to make sure they don't end up right back in the ER next month.
Exactly. And Pillar 3, governance, is the hospital administration.
The glue that holds it together.
It's the secure database. It's the regular meetings between the ER triage nurses, the physical therapists, the surgeons, and the board of directors. It ensures that the vital information gathered in the ER is accurately translated into the patient's permanent record so that the entire hospital network can provide coordinated long-term care.
Because without that administrative infrastructure, the ER doctors and the physical therapists might be doing amazing work on their own, but their knowledge is totally siloed.
Yes.
They're just a bunch of well-meaning medical professionals bumping into each other in the dark, and the patient ultimately falls through the cracks anyway.
That structural integration is precisely what Matsamila is pitching to the city here. Because without structured collaboration, a community forum is really just gathering grievances.
Like a complaint box.
Right. They act as a sponge, soaking up all the neighborhood's anger and confusion. But if they have absolutely no mechanism to wring that sponge out into the city's central database, all that data is useless. Pillar 3 establishes a formal pipeline.
So the forum takes the localized qualitative data, right? Like the resolved mediations or the common misunderstandings they keep identifying during their compliance workshops.
And they translate it. They turn it into a quantitative, structured report.
They turn the noise of the community into actionable data that the city's centralized map can actually process. They can literally tell the city, hey, heads up, we've had a 40% spike in illegal occupation disputes in Ward 12 this month. We are mediating the immediate conflicts, but you guys need to look at your broader infrastructure planning for that area because a pressure cooker is building.
It's brilliant. The three pillars transform a disparate group of well-intentioned community actors into a localized, highly efficient sensory network for the city's own infrastructure.
But, and then here's where we have to look at this from the perspective of the people sitting across the table from Percy Matsamela,
The city officials.
the city officials. A beautiful theory about human connection and data pipelines is completely useless if it doesn't provide tangible, measurable benefits to the government officials who are actually holding the purse strings.
Oh, absolutely.
A city council that is currently facing budget deficits and massive logistical backlogs does not approve strategic partnerships just based on good vibes and community spirit.
No, they need hard numbers.
Right. So how does this model actually serve the bureaucratic and financial interests of the city of Johannesburg?
This is where the presentation transitions from a really compelling social plea to a ruthlessly pragmatic bureaucratic pitch. Metsamela outlines what we can essentially call the currency of prevention.
The currency of prevention, I like that.
He details the cascading benefits of this three-pillar model with a rhythm that is clearly designed to appeal directly to an overwhelmed municipal administrator. He says, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, but the core is, every dispute prevented saves time. Every family assisted strengthens community stability. Every deceased estate properly reported improves municipal records. Every resident educated reduces future conflict.
It's just this constant drumbeat of efficiency. He's basically looking them in the eye and saying, we are going to take all the tiny things that eat up hundreds of hours of your staff's time, and we are going to handle them before they ever reach your desk.
Exactly. And he goes even further, moving from general efficiency to explicitly listing the value to the city.
Getting down to brass tacks.
Yes. He points out that this proactive model reduces pressure on municipal departments. It strengthens public confidence in the local government, which, by the way, is vital for any elected official who wants to stay in office.
Oh, for sure.
It improves housing compliance. But there are two specific points he highlights that carry immense bureaucratic and financial weight. The model assists in identifying unreported deceased estates, and it supports revenue recovery.
Okay, let's focus intensely on that phrase, revenue recovery, because when you unpack the financial domino effect of a single housing dispute, it is actually mind-blowing.
It really is.
Matsamela is essentially pitching a massive municipal cost-saving initiative, but he's disguised it as a heartwarming community empowerment project.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of municipal finance, it is arguably the single most persuasive argument in the entire document. Let's trace the exact hypothetical chain of events that connects a living room argument to the city's treasury. Let's go back to our example of the siblings fighting over the inherited property.
Right, the two brothers. The mother passes away. The siblings start arguing over who lived there longer, who deserves the house. And because they are in conflict, neither of them goes down to the municipal office to formally report the death and initiate the transfer of the estate.
Precisely. The estate enters that legal limbo we discussed.
Sure.
Now, because it remains unreported, the municipality's centralized database is now fundamentally flawed.
Right.
The system still lists the deceased mother as the legal owner. Therefore, the city's automated billing system just continues to generate property tax assessments, utility bills, and service charges, all in the name of a dead person.
And meanwhile, the siblings who are actually living in the house are totally consumed by their dispute. They probably aren't even opening the mail addressed to their mother.
Right.
Or perhaps they refuse to pay the bills because they both argue the other sibling should be the one responsible.
Exactly. The immediate consequence of that is that the debt begins to accumulate fast. The municipal ledger shows an active account that is suddenly defaulting on its payments month after month after month.
Yeah.
The city is physically providing water, sanitation, and electrical grid access to that property, but they are not recovering the revenue for those services.
And a city's ability to maintain its macro infrastructure, fixing the roads, upgrading the power grid, paying the centralized bureaucracy itself, all of that is entirely dependent on the continuous collection of that micro revenue from individual properties.
Yes, every drop counts.
So if thousands of properties across Johannesburg are caught in these phantom disputes, the financial hemorrhage must be absolutely massive.
It is staggering. The city cannot effectively collect revenue on an estate that is paralyzed by undocumented human conflict. They can issue all the automated default notices they want, but a database cannot mediate a sibling rivalry.
Wow, so enter the Gauteng Housing Forum. By implementing Pillar 1 community mediation, they physically step into that living room.
Right.
They de-escalate the siblings' anger. They mediate a compromise. Then, utilizing Pillar 2 housing compliance, they educate the family on the legal necessity of formally registering the estate.
Yes, the family, now stabilized and informed, finally walks into the municipal office and properly reports the deceased estate.
So the city's records are updated.
A new, living, rightful owner takes legal responsibility for the property.
And the exact moment that new name goes on the deed, the city can finally resume collecting its revenue. The billing cycle is restored.
This is the absolute brilliance of Matsumella's pitch. He is drawing a direct, undeniable line from community mediation to the city's financial health. He is essentially telling the panel of officials, look, we aren't just asking you to care about the emotional well-being of your citizens, though that is technically your legal mandate. We are showing you how our on-the-ground, human-level intervention actively repairs your broken spreadsheets and recovers your lost revenue.
By solving the human problem, you automatically solve the administrative and financial problem.
Precisely.
It makes the proposal practically irresistible from a pragmatic budgetary standpoint. I mean, you don't have to be a bleeding heart altruist to support this. You just have to be an accountant who wants the ledger to balance.
Which leads us directly into the final and really the most crucial piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
The architecture of action.
Right, how they actually do it.
Because a great pitch with undeniable financial benefits still requires a solid logistical roadmap. How does the Gaoting Housing Forum actually propose turning this incredibly comprehensive theory into a physical reality without immediately overwhelming a municipal system that is already struggling to keep its head above water?
Because bureaucracies are notoriously and honestly somewhat necessarily terrified of sudden, massive change.
Oh, they hate change.
If Mazzamella walked in there and demanded that the city immediately hand over all housing dispute resolution to his forum, across the entirety of Johannesburg all at once, the panel would likely reject it outright, just based on the sheer logistical risk alone.
And Mazzamella anticipates that exact fear. Their rollout strategy is highly calibrated to minimize municipal risk. They do not demand an immediate citywide overhaul.
What do they ask for?
Instead, they propose a structured pilot program. They suggest beginning the implementation only in selected high-priority wards.
Ah, okay. And they define the methodology of this pilot very clearly in the text. He states they will monitor performance, report regularly to the city, and measure outcomes using clear indicators.
Yes. By constraining the initial scope to a pilot program with measurable results, he lowers the risk threshold for the city to almost zero. In bureaucratic terms, this is a highly attractive proposition.
Right, because if it fails.
Right. If the pilot fails, say the mediators are ineffective or the community just flat out rejects the education workshops, the failure is completely localized. The city can simply choose not to renew the program next year, having lost very little time or money.
But if it succeeds, if the pilot wards show a massive stabilization in property disputes and a big uptick in revenue recovery,
then the city officials look like visionary leaders for backing the initiative.
it's an asymmetric risk profile that highly favors the government.
Exactly. And the specific mechanical request, the actual ask at the very end of the presentation, reflects a very deep understanding of civic procedure. They aren't just asking for a handshake agreement and a pat on the back. They respectfully request the opportunity to establish a joint working group and commence a memorandum of understanding process.
An MOU. Let's clarify what that actually means in this specific context, because it sounds like generic corporate jargon, but it's really the operational glue of this entire idea.
Right. A memorandum of understanding is a formal negotiated document that outlines the specific terms, roles, and responsibilities of a partnership between two entities before any legally binding contracts are drafted.
Okay.
In this scenario, an MOU would dictate exactly how data flows from the forum's mediators to the city's housing department. It would formally define what constitutes a resolved dispute and establish the strict security protocols for handling residents' private information.
So it's basically the blueprint for Pillar 3's governance. It ensures that when the forum reports a problem, the city actually has a designated municipal officer whose specific job it is to receive and process that report. It formalizes the bridge.
Yes, and Mazzamella frames this request with a really potent distinction. He states explicitly, we are not asking for charity, we are asking for partnership.
Man, that framing is so important. Charity implies a one-way flow of resources.
Right, just writing a check.
It implies the city writing a check to a nonprofit and just hoping they do good work. It creates a dynamic of dependence. partnership, however, implies a mutual exchange of value. It implies shared labor and shared goals. He is standing before the government and saying, "We recognize your legal mandate, but you must recognize our social willingness. Neither of us can succeed without the other's specific form of capital."
The metaphor he uses is perfect. The Gauteng Housing Forum can become the bridge that brings these two together. A bridge doesn't replace the land masses on either side. It simply allows traffic to flow efficiently between them.
But looking at the sheer scale of their ambition, they aren't just planning to build a small footbridge.
No, not at all.
In his closing remarks, Matsamela states that if the pilot is proven successful, this partnership has the potential to become a model for housing governance, not only in Johannesburg, but across Gauteng.
That is an entire province.
Millions and millions of people. But a lingering question remains about the mechanics of actually scaling this up. How do you practically measure a dispute that was prevented?
Yeah, that's tricky.
If the core metric of success is the total absence of a crisis, how does the joint working group prove to the city that the pilot is even working?
This touches on the inherent difficulty of preventative metrics in public policy. It is notoriously challenging to quantify an event that did not occur. You can't exactly count the number of houses that didn't burn down today. However, within the framework of the three-pillar model, the indicators of success wouldn't simply be a void of data. The joint working group would measure the active volume of proactive interventions and cross-reference them against the city's historical reactive data.
Okay, walk me through that. What does that data cross-referencing look like on a spreadsheet?
So the forum would track the tangible outputs of their pillars. For example, they document the exact number of community mediations successfully completed in Ward 12. They track the number of residents who attended and completed housing compliance workshops. They record the number of previously contested deceased estates that have now been officially reported and registered with the municipality as a direct result of their intervention. Those are concrete, verifiable actions.
I see. And then the city looks at their own internal data for Ward 12.
Yes, exactly. The city analyzes their centralized data over the duration of the pilot. They look at the municipal court dockets. Are civil litigations regarding property disputes in Ward 12 trending downward compared to previous years? Are requests for evictions decreasing? Is the rate of revenue recovery on previously delinquent subsidized properties actively increasing?
Ah, I get it now.
When the city sees a 30% drop in housing-related court cases originating from the pilot ward, and they simultaneously see the forum's data showing 500 successful mediations in that exact same ward, the correlation becomes the proof of prevention.
The active work done in the living rooms creates a measurable silence in the courtrooms.
Precisely.
And that verified silence is what gives the city the bureaucratic justification to scale the MOU across the entire province.
It creates an evidence-based pathway to fundamentally reshape how the government interacts with its citizens on the absolute most basic level of shelter and community.
Let's zoom out here and synthesize this incredible journey we've just been on. We started by looking at a city struggling under the weight of a sprawling, seemingly intractable housing crisis.
Right.
We looked at a centralized government that, despite its massive resources and clear legal mandate, was operating with a huge proximity deficit. They were deploying slow, adversarial, reactive solutions to fast-moving, deeply emotional human conflicts.
And we explored the devastating sociological and financial toll of that disconnect. We saw families shattered by inheritance disputes, neighborhoods buckling under the strain of illegal occupations, and a municipal treasury slowly bleeding out because its databases were entirely disconnected from the physical reality on the street.
And then we walk step by step through the Gauteng Housing Forum's highly logical, incredibly pragmatic three-pillar bridge. We saw how community mediation acts as the ER triage, right? Stopping the bleeding of conflict.
Right.
How housing compliance acts as preventative education, empowering residents rather than just policing them. And finally, how governance acts as the administrative nervous system, translating that grassroots human progress into actionable data that repairs the city's spreadsheets and recovers its revenue.
It is a profound testament to the power of structured, localized intervention. It proves that the solution to a massive systemic problem isn't always to just build a more massive centralized system. Sometimes the only viable solution is to return to the human scale, utilizing the social currency of the people who are already standing right there in the community, experiencing the reality of the crisis every day.
And that brings us to the core listener takeaway from this deep dive. Percy Matsamela closes his presentation with a sentiment that really redefines the expectations of public service. He tells the panel, "Leadership is measured not only by how we respond to crises, but by how we prevent them.
It is a necessary paradigm shift. For far too long, civic heroism has been defined entirely by the dramatic response to a disaster.
Oh, absolutely.
We applaud the government when they arrive with sirens blazing to put out the fire. But true, sustainable governance is quiet. It is the administrative crisis that never happens because an empowered community member intervened early. Reactive governance is a luxury that modern, dense urban communities can simply no longer afford. The human collateral damage and the financial costs are just too high.
And that leaves us with a provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive. Think back to that image we started with, a massive systemic problem that feels entirely too big for any one person to solve.
Wow.
Now, look at the ecosystem of your own life, your workplace, or your neighborhood. Where are you currently waiting for a distant central authority, maybe it's upper management at your company, a landlord, or a local politician, to finally recognize and fix a festering issue?
It's a great question.
What is your local equivalent of a chaotic housing dispute? And more importantly, what would it look like if you stopped waiting for the government's paper map to update and instead applied this exact three-pillar model: mediation, education, and structured collaboration to solve that issue at the ground level before the crisis ever truly hits?
A fascinating framework to apply to almost any structural challenge.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.